Hey, so the 20 gallons come a long way. I want to tell you exactly where I'm at and tell you where I'm going right after this. Hey YouTube, this is pecktec. So I've had a lot of fun this week playing with my new project, the 20 gallon. It's definitely a different tank than I've ever worked on before. It's definitely a theme tank. I'm not going for a natural look in any way. I'd like to incorporate some of the things I've learned from trying to achieve those things into more of a fantasy scenario. There seemed to be a lot of back and forth about the hand and whether or not I should include the hand. So I'd like to start the video by sort of explaining the hand and what I had in mind there and how I got to this point. So if you watched the last video, you noticed that I said I had two inspirations for this tank, one being this photo, and the other a giant sculpture that I visited when I was probably 13, 14 years old. The statue is called The Awakening, and it's basically this giant sort of coming up out of the ground. And this is a really huge sculpture. We had fun. We all got on the arm or the leg or something and took a photo with it, and it looked like the hand was like reaching down to grab us. And I was just fascinated, especially when I was younger. And so about a year ago, my dad got into molding things. My dad is actually a competitive trap shooter and loves to shoot clays. And at one point he wanted to make a cover for his trailer hitch, and he molded one of the clays that he likes to shoot. Since that was pretty fascinating, he also did his hand. It is so funny because everybody was instantly enamored with this hand that he had made. Then pretty soon Kerrigan made a hand, and then I made a hand, and then I made another hand, and I knew right away I wanted to incorporate it into a tank. So the idea for this aquarium started with a hand and then went out from there. At this point too, I was also working on the zombie tank, and I thought it would be neat to have something kind of coming up out of the ground. But I really didn't like the idea in the end. I really didn't like the idea of it looking like a severed hand. Several people had mentioned severed hand, and that's not really what I was going for. Think more like monument. I put the trees here in such a way to sort of scale that hand up so it would appear even bigger. And that's why a lot of the plants that I've included are either really soft and fine leaves or small carpeting leaves. Monte Carlo likes to go and spread and does really well. So I'm hoping it's going to spread out all through here. I'm hoping this 4-leaf clover does really well too. Although submerged, it only has 1 leaf. I've had some luck getting this to go, but I've never tried it with bright light and CO2, so it'll be interesting to see what it does. Same's true for the Monte Carlo. Most of the tanks I have with Monte Carlo don't have CO2 or anything like that, so I'm excited to see what it does with like a little help. Most of these mosses I've never kept before, and I thought that would be a really interesting way to do all the limbs and like just different types of mosses. And I got a huge selection. Thank you so much to H2O Plants for sending me this great pack of plants. Let's take a look at all the stuff that came. Okay, so also just in time for my birthday, I got a package from H2O Plants. So H2O Plants got in touch with me and wanted to send me some plants and kind of show what their service is like. He also has a plant pack, which is basically, it's kind of like the weekly box subscriptions, but for plants. That's something he's just started up, and we'll talk more about that probably later on. But today, we've got this little assortment of mosses, and he told me he usually includes a card with each kind. I don't think he had a card yet for some of these mosses, but he usually includes a card with each kind of plant that gives care instructions and has some contact information and stuff like that, so that's really cool. Possibly Christmas moss. Here's just a little bit of Taiwan moss, which is really neat. Okay. Rose moss. Interesting. I've never even heard of that before. He said he had sort of a collection of all these different sort of random pieces of moss, and some of them had grown together and stuff, but we're going to just play with it and see. Then we've got a couple of tissue cultures. Several different types of mosses here. We're going to leave those sealed until we go to use them. It's a lot of moss. It looks like flame moss. Spiky. See, Affini, Christmas moss, flame moss. Wow, big bag of flame moss. String moss. Mosses, all the mosses. Oh wow. Arima MR. Huh? Okay. And Java moss, the old standby. A little tiny thing of Custodens nebolus. Custodens nebolus. Interesting. Wow, this is much more than I expected. Really, really wide assortment of mosses. Now, I've been on his website. He has a ton of stuff available. It's a really clean shopping cart experience. I'm definitely going to order some plants from him. I want to spend some money there. Yeah, I definitely could not have accomplished what I've accomplished here without your help, and I really appreciate it. One last thing I'll probably do to this tank is next time I do a water change, I'm going to collect some gravel from some of the seasoned tanks. I'm going to spread it around here to kind of make the substrate more interesting while things are growing in. Ideally, when this is done, this is going to be covered with plants. So I don't really feel like I've got to do a lot to decorate the substrate, but at least in the meantime, it might be a little bit more visually attractive. And I usually do sprinkle some rocks around. I just didn't have any on hand that I really wanted. And some seasoned rocks on top of here will really help kickstart the aquarium cycle. So I put the trees all on bases so I could move them around without them falling over really easily and really figure out where I wanted them to be. But once I decided, I went ahead and I siliconed them down. After that, I waited 48 hours before I did anything else. And that's when I eventually got to put in the substrate and really start planting. So a combo that I've been using quite a bit for more of the soil-based substrates is to use something a little bit inert and thicker towards the bottom. And for this, I chose fluorite black. It was actually a little bit finer grain than I expected, so I didn't actually rinse it. I don't really advise that. You should probably always rinse your substrate. However, just to see what would happen, I didn't rinse any of my substrate, and I just filled it up real carefully. We'll get to that in a minute. But I put that heavier fluorite down right around the base of the trees, just to give it a little bit more weight there, and it actually has kind of more of a long-term nutrient benefit too. So it's kind of nice to have that all along the base of it. So I do a really thin layer everywhere else, and then where I might need some extra heft to hold the trees down, I put it down that way. Of course, the other substrate that I used was provided by SeaChem. They sent me some bags of this Aquasolium black humate. This is what's called a soil-based substrate. It is not inert. It could release a little bit of ammonia, or it will release a little bit of ammonia into your water when you initially use it. It's not something I would typically use if I've got to put fish in the same day. And I never recommend that, no matter how good you are at keeping tanks. Always let it sit for at least a day or two. But I've used Aquasoil quite a bit, and I've used the fluval stratum a little bit, and I was real excited to try Aquasolium, so thank you very much for sending that along. One thing that's great but can be frustrating about the soil-based substrates is that they're really fine and it's a really light material. So it's easy to get the plants in, but it's also easy to knock them out. But once the plant starts to grow, it makes it really easy for it to slide back and forth across all those little pebbles in here. And it works fantastic for carpeting plants. The other thing it tends to do is lower the pH of the water, which I might be looking to do. I haven't decided exactly what I'm going to do as far as stocking in this tank, but some things I've read on the internet have said that this wood will lower the pH of the water too, so it'll be really interesting to see what a combination of both things actually do compared to like the Edge or even the steampunk tank. So I set this up on Monday, the day of the eclipse, and I'm going to do a water test I think today and see exactly where we're at. I was at my favorite aquarium shop the other day, and I came across some 4-leaf clover. I've tried that a few times, and a couple of times it's seemed to work, and a couple of times it didn't. But I haven't ever tried it with this kind of soil, and also, the bright light and CO2 and everything else. So I got a little bit of that to throw in, sort of last minute. The Monte Carlo I mostly pulled from my other tanks. I've got a ton of Monte Carlo in some of the other tanks, and I needed to trim it back some so it doesn't just kind of all kill itself and die out. And that little Spec 3 over there, it's almost an inch thick. So I've been pulling stuff out from here and there. I love to just put a little bit in and kind of just watch it expand. But I might spread it into different areas and stuff. So if you want it to fill in where it's brightest, sometimes I put it around the perimeter and let it grow towards the light. Now for the moss, my intention was to wrap them all carefully around with twine. But I did a couple of things that really precluded that. One is I decided to go ahead and glue the branches down to some degree. Some of them I just was able to work into the holes, and some of them I glued down. But after I siliconed everything down, it was hard to tell which was which. So I tied exactly one branch with string, and all the rest I did with glue. I love and hate glue. I mean, it makes it like a lot faster and a lot easier. So even in awkward situations, you can kind of take the gelatin type glue, put a little bit on the branch, and then get a little fluffy bunch of the plant and kind of just put it on there. But I try to attach it to as small a portion of the plant as possible, because I don't think it does the plant any favors. So one thing you could consider also is to initially glue the plants down, then go back in with string. So what I want to do is let them grow out a little bit, and as they get a little bushier, I might start to string them down. So if I had to do it over again, what I would have done is silicone all the trees down, then take the branches and start fitting them and just tie it up and put it on. But doing that whole thing probably would have been several hours worth of work, so pack a lunch. Even doing what I did here took a really long time. This was probably 2 hours. I spent a lot of time spraying it down too with my mister just to keep everything nice and moist. And then I did these plants last, and then I filled up the tank. What was cool about the corner filter and filling up the tank is that I just directed the water into the corner filter. It came out this thing and barely disturbed any of the substrate. If anything, it moved a little bit of substrate away from the corner filter, which is good because I don't really want it going back there. But it didn't kick it up very much at all. So I filled this up and it was fairly clear. Now it went foggy for about 3 days, and mind you, I didn't rinse any of this off. This is all straight out of the bag. But by Friday, which is today, it looks really, really clear. Okay, so I like to put lids on all my aquariums, and more often than not, they're this lid right here. And the problem with lids like this is this dark plastic piece that goes down the middle. Now, this functions as an effective maintenance window or a feeding lid or something like that. But this big dark piece precludes having these really directional and narrow LED lights and putting them right in the middle. So if I want this in the middle, so some of the back can get some light and some of the front can get some light, then this dark colored strip that goes down really impedes the light. So I went to Lowe's and I picked some of this up. It's a really thick piece of plastic, and the guys there have the tools to cut it. So I just had it cut. This starts off at 18 by 24 inches. I had them cut the width down to 11.5 inches so it would fit inside of here. And I know this won't go the whole way, but the piece that they cut off, I had that also cut to 11.5. Unfortunately, it's still too wide. So if you decide to go the same route, my advice would be get that second piece that you get cut off made a little bit thinner. It's actually really, really nice and clear, except for the big handprint I just made. That's in the back. So we'll just slide this in. So this is a nice, clear, effective lid that will not impede the light. So I can put it now wherever I want on here without that big shadow from the middle part. One problem with the plastic like this, I got the thickest plastic you can get. And the reason is that this will quickly bend and sort of bend down and deform. Once it gets warm especially, it'll just start to bow. I made a tiny, tiny little lid for my little tank, and I've noticed it's always kind of this warped shape. It'll just kind of it gets real lazy. Okay, so this could potentially do the same thing, but all of these hardscape items are so close to the surface that at least for a time until they rot away, it'll be sort of an effective pillar if it does start to bow down a little bit. I'm real impressed with it. I think it looks great. Really, really clear on top. And I really want to see what happens with this. I want to see what happens later on, like in a few months or in a year, when algae's kind of gotten onto the hand and it really looks like a structure and not so much like a one-to-one copy. I thought about using other things to perhaps, show a little perspective as to the scale of this hand. There's all kinds of crazy things I can do. If you'd like to know more about any of the stuff I've talked about today, there'll be links in the description below. This was my limited run first try shirt, and I just got it today. Several of you guys bought some shirts, and I just wanted to ask, if you bought one, take a picture with yourself and share it with me on Facebook and Twitter. The links for that's down below. I want to see you in those shirts. And that's all I got for you today, folks. Follow your bliss, keep a clean tank, and I'll see you soon. Bye-bye. A really small, bushy kind of leaf. So I'd like to start off the video just by explaining the hand and kind of what I had in mind. Beginning elements to the and we'll be talking about, and we'll be talking more about that later. We'll be talking about. I was in the shop the other. I was in my favorite aquarium shop the other.
What's up with this guy? I know karate. The kung fu master here in town.